So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thanks again for joining us for another session on the Asset Protection Risk Mitigation channel of Conversations on Retail. I'm Brand Elverston, your host. Everybody knows me. If you don't, 22 years, Walmart Asset Protection. And our client list, or our guest list rather, here on the series, if you're not familiar with it, it's been quite impressive. We've had General Petraeus on. We've had executives from all the major retailers on. We've had academics. We've had subject matter experts in data analysis. And, a good example of that is in the active shooter phenomenon that's been going on for years. And I'm probably missing somebody, but it's been a good run. So we've been doing this, 18 months or so. Shawn is a repeat customer. And here's the reason for the audience, and I'll give a lead in, that the reason Shawn is primed for this session, everybody, is that now with RELA, the Asset Protection RELA Conference and the Asset Protection NRF Conference, NRF Protect, having just completed last week, the feedback has been relatively consistent, to include the NRF Big Show, Shawn, that everybody in the world, when you go to the exhibitor area, everybody is touting AI.
Yep.
Whether it's true or not, some of it could be straight up bullshit. Some of it is authentic, but it's so opaque that it's like, okay, if I'm an asset protection executive, I have, like an operations executive, I have critical things I need resolved, and I have important. And where the gap has been in the comments, either me attending or I've received, Shawn, from the executives that went, not only is everybody doing AI, but it's like almost a technology in search of a problem. So our theme here, guys, for the audience is going to be with Shawn, is to kind of drill that down and narrow the scope in on what we're calling AI 101. I'll be talking about this at the Apex conference in Nashville in September, to try and ferret out, if you will, reality from hype. And keeping in mind, Shawn, most of our listeners, not all, are asset protection retail executives. So we kind of want to get to the so what. So Shawn, refresh us on your background, buddy. He never says it, but I will. He, like me, is a veteran. So that's a plus. Infantry guy, but still, nonetheless, we'll claim it. So anyway, go ahead, Shawn.
I got the pleasure of sleeping in armored personnel carriers as a APC driver, and it was a good time, an informative time for me.
Good stuff.
So I'm glad to be here, Brand, to talk about a subject that I have been engaged with longer than November of 2022, when I think a lot of folks actually either thought AI was invented, or two, I guess understood that it actually could have a material business impact at that point in time. In November of 2022, for those who don't recall, is when ChatGPT was announced, right?
Yep.
And I think the nature of that interaction just lent itself to a widespread adoption of an AI technology. So I talked about being engaged with AI for some time prior. So it's been, I want to say, a little bit over 10 years. My first foray into it was my startup. The startup was Niopoly, where we built a platform that algorithmically sought to find the perfect price between a buyer and a seller, a single buyer and a seller. So it wasn't an auction. It was actually a algorithmic approach to landing on a price that somebody was willing to pay. We all know that we were willing to pay zero for something if somebody would give it up. So there was some psychological elements mixed in there that the model was able to derive, ultimately to drive someone to pay the highest likely price that they were willing to pay. That was my first entrance into the marketplace. It was a learning algorithm. The second was actually at Zebra, where I got engaged with SmartLens. And this was a platform, or is a platform, that sits in the ceilings primarily of retailers, but certainly it has broader use cases. And at the time when I got engaged with it from a bringing it to market perspective, it integrated RFID, computer vision, Wi-Fi, and a micro-locating capability that, when integrated together using kind of an approach called sensor fusion, you could triangulate where products were not only located, but how they got there, right? So who brought them there? And so you could link up people and product movement in a way, because the mobile phone that somebody would be carrying would communicate with the device. The RFID tags would communicate with the device. The camera would pick up the physical object moving through the space, and the integration of all of those lent itself to some pretty incredible insights that, though was initially positioned for an inventory visibility perspective, has really picked up some great steam with respects to things like point of sale bypass. And so those items that somebody has stolen, you can see in the camera it getting stolen, and the RFID tag moving past it out of the store, and then somebody brings it back in to try to return it. And you could see exactly what took place there. And then the next item was Zebra again, but their robotics business unit, and being responsible for bringing that platform to the retail marketplace, and subsequently some other computer vision companies. So I've been around AI and have not only been around it in a practical sense that I just expressed, but also have taken the painful time at times to onboard it from an academic perspective as well. So I've been a person who can build models, train models, get my robots to chase my dog versus my cat, and all of that. So there's I think a pretty wide spectrum from again how it works to seeing it work in the real world that I've been able to be a part of. Probably right now, I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called COWORKED, where we are building agentic tech solutions that are looking to solve how retailers actually enact change, specifically in store environments. And so more to come on that, but yeah, you could see that at coworked.ai.
Interesting. Okay. We'll probably come back to that somewhere here in the discussion. So for us laymen, if you will, walk us through the pyramid, with AI and, a lot of the some questions I get is, what's the difference between AI and a simple algorithm? What is machine learning versus AI? Yep. What are its limitations, et cetera, et cetera? So can you take us from the horizon down to the shoreline?
Sure.
So we can distill the terminology at least.
So if we start at a definitional level, just to kind of level set there, I love this simple definition from a professor at CSAIL at MIT, the computer science and AI at MIT, from a professor, Thomas Malone, that is machines acting in ways that seem intelligent. Simple, right? So if you have a machine that is acting in a way that seems intelligent, there is AI there. Okay. Simple statement. When you consider the layers of AI, I would say that when somebody uses the term, we are using artificial intelligence and machine learning, there's a bit of like repetitive language being said. There's a bit of tautology there, right? Fact is that AI is the overall umbrella term for a number of different approaches to getting machines to either understand data or learn from data. Okay. And there is a distinction between those two things, and I'll get into that in a sec. So artificial intelligence is the big umbrella, really any technique where computers are starting to like mimic human intelligence in some way, right? Machine learning is a subset of that basically is using very complex statistical techniques where machines are learning from data, right? Again, as an umbrella below.
Okay.
So you can think opening up Excel, having a bunch of rows in your Excel file that provide you with home prices, square footage, zip code, number of bedrooms, is there a pool, and whatever other features, as it would be called in the space, that you would imagine. And you get that to spit out, do a regression to then help you with entering values like the square footage, like number of bedrooms, like the zip code, to help in predicting a home price, right? That is a very, again, anyone can open up Excel and install the right add-on and then use Solver to basically use machine learning for what it's worth, like that capability, right? So if you will, Y equals MX plus B, right?
Yep.
Now, when you get to deep learning, this is where there's if you will, a sprinkling of like calculus in there, and you're able to allow a machine, when provided with vast amounts of data, right? So, in the neighborhood of 1,000 records, it could be done with maybe 100, depending on the nature of the algorithm you're using in deep learning. But this is where you hear about neural networks and the black box, and machines being able to derive predictive abilities that you and I would never have the ability to do. Deep learning takes what we would have seen in like machine learning and just exponentially increases the potential of the predictive abilities, right? So instead of just, like I said, number of bedrooms and the square footage, you have a pool and all of these kind of basic ideals, right? And then this is just a kind of maybe a stretch of an example, but a deep learning algorithm could also go, well, your house will sell more if you have 10,000 blades of grass versus 5,000 blades of grass. And I'm trying to draw an example of the things we would not remotely consider or think of.
Yep.
These technologies at the deep learning level are able to derive those kind of extreme edges that still have a material impact on the prediction that we just.
So is it fair to say then a difference between just machine learning and deep learning would be predictive capability in the deep learning? So if I have all kinds of data as a retailer, as you well know, you've been a retailer, but you got all kinds of shit in the blender. And one thing that we always touted, but we really didn't know what the hell we were talking about, predictive analytics. So if I've got all this crime data, I use CAP index, every retailer knows what that is. I got all the federal data, the crime statistics, I've got all my apprehension data, the dollar values, most stolen items, all that stuff.
Yep.
Deep learning could tell me more about hedging my risks than I would learn otherwise. In other words, it says your optimal time is this time of day. These are the items they're probably going to steal. They're going to go out this exit based on all the data you fed it. Is that fair to say that it's predictable?
Yeah. The ability to provide it with immense amounts of data.
Okay.
Immense amounts of data. And then with the appropriate algorithm, and this is certainly an idea that's important, is that data algorithm produces model. Okay. So the two, data and algorithms together, produce models. Models are the things that then you run and actually do your predictions off of inference, right? And you have it right, where you could pull data as long as there was, no, I'm not going to say that. You can pull data from a variety of different sources, right? And you can have a deep learning model make sense of it. Either one, through just, I'm going to give you a bunch of data and I'm not going to supervise you. I'm not going to tell you what to look for. Just tell me what's there, right? And it will create, from a vast amount of data, you can get a model that creates interesting clusters of data all by itself, right? And from that clusters, I mean, in a loss prevention perspective, you can use that clustering insights to go, okay, well, what is the relationship between, I don't know, these stores that have more crime and what else was put into that cluster, right? So you can start to think about those sorts of relationships. Or if you tell it that, hey, these are cases where people have stolen from us, right? Now you're telling it what to look for. These are cases where people have stolen from us. It's a little bit like the regression example. I want to find more of the likelihood of these sorts of things happening. Supervised. This is supervised.
Yep.
And yeah, you're able to then take all of that data you referred to and train a model to look for a likely situation where that same event will happen. So
one of the recent things, and you may have seen it on LinkedIn, I was interviewed by CX Dive, media outlet up close to you, actually. I think they're out in New York. Anyway, done a couple of interviews with them with different people on different topics. And the one that just recently came out was the discussion was around insurance hedging on active shooter risks. So, the insurance industry, not unlike the airline industry, they're always looking to, pinch another penny out of the wallet.
Yeah.
And, my response to that was, you know what, if I'm a retailer, so you get insurance that will help you with the hundreds of millions of dollars you lose if you have an active shooter event. How about duty of care that most people are familiar with, that at some point you have an active shooting event, all the red flags were there. Why the hell didn't you have these readily available technologies in place to hedge against that? So now not only are you going to write a check for $100 million, you're also in trouble.
Yeah.
Do you think we are, it's no secret, Zeroise is up there near you. Occucon's in the AI space, spill detect through existing camera networks. Everseen.
Yeah.
Where would you put those guys under the AI umbrella, whether it's, as simple as an algorithm, or is this deep learning, or if I'm a retailer, where do they fall?
Those platforms are undoubtedly leveraging deep learning. If it has to deal with using data from a camera to determine an event, then you need to train a model to actually be looking for those very particular things. And those companies are going to have, very proprietary models that they've built that give them the edge with respects to what they're doing. So they are undoubtedly using deep learning. They are, though, technologies that are capturing the event as it's happening, right? What you were kind of alluding to a bit was maybe this, we're going to go to Minority Report, but a little bit of the precog, right? And I know the folks at UF are also working on ways to try and get layers of how can we get intelligence further away from the point of, event that will lend itself to this. And this is where it gets tricky because there at some point is always a human who's involved, or at what point do you say, I believe that this solution, human involved from the perspective of, I see this thing, it doesn't feel right, it doesn't look right. Should I report it? Should I not report it? Right? Okay. And they do report it. And then I know we've heard, I'm not disparaging anybody, but we've heard these stories about how X, Y, and Z was reported to law enforcement, so-and-so, and they didn't act on it. Right. And then, so it's one of these things where there's two perspectives that you start to fall into with this is that, one, these solutions can bubble up. Hey, I think it's likely that X, Y, and Z could happen. Then, what do you trust the efficacy of the solution well enough? Has there been enough reps, so if you will, with it, that you can use that to go to someone of authority and say, hey, with some pretty high confidence, we think there's going to be a problem here.
So in the sense of data, and of course, as you well know and everybody knows, one thing at larger retailers, certainly Walmart, never have been short of data.
Never.
The challenge has always been, so
information
what?
and knowledge. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
86 million rows of data, 400 petabytes, and what the hell do I do with it?
Right.
And analytics was part of my purview when I was at Walmart, and I was very fortunate, had a strong guy that could see around corners, and he could make a story out of data easily, and it was very valuable. But one of the challenges we always had, and he schooled me on many times, is correlation's not causation. So he said, Brand, look, if you're trying to get me to say, if all these factors are in the blender, you're likely going to shrink. You're going to be a high shrink store. Selecting those those data points was very complex because in my simple mind, it's like, which ones matter, which ones don't. And if they do matter, by how much? Is it a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10, or is it a 5 because it's in it's next to an interstate, it rains all the time, old people, elderly people shop whatever, all of that stuff. And, we used to, some of them would brag about, when they did shrink out, my model was right. I'm like, well, if you knew that, why the hell did you wait to shrink out? So we're back to the active shooter scenario. If I know I have predictive capability, am I preventing, or am I simply patting myself on the back saying, well, I told you so? Is that something that makes sense? Oh, well, I know it does, but kind of walk us through when you have literally, at Walmart, hundreds of thousands of data points from a multitude of sources, internal and external. Is it reasonable for Shawn Harris, as the CEO of Walmart US, to expect in today's availability technology, I should be able to accurately predict loss levels or critical events, i.e. active shooter, I'll stick with that one, with what I already have? Or is that still Minority Report? Is that still down the road a little bit?
So the question you ask is whether or not you should be able to predict an event. And I would say that you could probably predict the likelihood of an event based on if you have the appropriate data. If you have the appropriate data, and I know some of these larger retailers get information from law enforcement and have access to even what happened last night for police reports or what have you, right? That there is this data, and so let's go down the path of saying, like, sure, they could predict these sorts of events. The rub in my mind comes to, and you kind of use the word, so what? But it's like, so I'm going to use it in a different maybe way, but so what can they do about it? Will they close a store for a day to just figure it out? Will they, put a notice out to someone, to law enforcement to say, we think this might happen, where that becomes a slippery slope, and a tough thing to do. And I think between those sorts of behaviors, like that being, or maybe there's just you're providing a heads up to store management, or, maybe even staff around, there's a different risk level, but then what is, I'm not sure that's the right thing per se either. So, being able to, in the moment, quickly use these solutions to certainly identify potential loss events, to identify somebody who has drawn a weapon in a place that would be otherwise considered a safe zone of sorts, and doing the appropriate level of immediate alerting, so that people can then make the best decisions they can in their own, in that case, I think makes a ton of sense. And I'll say this around data and what you can do with it. But again, this comes at a price too. Is given the vast amounts of operational data, customer interaction data, external data from, again, police reports and weather events, stuff. Like I'll shoot weather events, whatever it may be. That data plus signals from today, if you will, or the moment, could be used to derive simulations, right? You can use AI to create simulations of activities in a store and start to think about scenario planning through that lens as well. And if X, Y, and Z happens, what should be the mitigating steps? What should be the things we do? What should be, if X, Y, and Z happens, what can we do to mitigate loss? At that point, it's going to be loss, right? What can we, not stop it, but what can we do to mitigate loss? Are there things that we can change in the physical environment? Are there new SOPs that we can put in place for employees to operate to? I think there's just a reality to this, in that we're still in a world where the complex human is at play. And in this system, and I mean system, the environment in which these independent actors are at play, that because you're likely to get a prediction wrong on what somebody's behavior may be, I'm not sure that a Walmart is willing to take that, or any large company is willing to take the risk around getting that wrong. But what can you do to play out literally hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of scenarios, probabilistically stack rank them, and then come up with mitigations for them? Again, to start, all in the world of bits, right? You don't need to start putting up walls in stores or doing chain links or locking everything up. Like, you can play this out in the world of bits, all sorts of wild circumstances, and then think about what is the likelihood of something like this happening. And if it's above your determined, above the line, then what's going to be our mitigations? How much are we going to be willing to spend to do this thing to, again, reduce mitigate the loss, not eliminate the loss.
Yeah, in our sense, with those models, and over my years at Walmart, I bet I saw 1,000 of them from different people. I'm like, dude, if you have a credible model, then you shouldn't be having the shrink event, because somewhere in the middle of the year, it's telling you you're coming off the rails. So if there is confidence in that outcome, i.e. the annual inventory real number compared to what your model said, and that was often, you bring up a great point, that was often where it came off the rails. It's like you knew it, but how do you communicate to the store manager, so what? Here's what it's telling you to go do to fix that.
Right.
Right. Okay, so one more definition question I want to ask you, because a lot of times the two terms are tossed around as synonyms. The difference between an algorithm and true AI. And let me share with you what I was told a while ago. Is that basically an algorithm in a camera view, an algorithm can tell you something's happening, but AI will tell you what is happening. Is that an accurate distillation?
I don't think I would. I would provide my thought when I hear those two terms is that an algorithm is at this point it's either manually created by somebody, a very smart human can derive an algorithm, or today in this world of Gen AI can generate algorithms. Okay. And for me, what an algorithm is where you're taking something and passing it through the algorithm, and then there's some output.
Like a formula.
and it doesn't, yeah, and or an AI, a model,
Okay.
right? You don't, in algorithms are, algorithms, again, to me, in many respects, are fixed things. And AI is a more, and this is the rub, is that an AI model is a fixed thing too. A fixed thing that in some cases you can make into what would be considered a online model, in that as data passes through it, it learns, and then it runs that back through its training sessions fast to adjust the weights within the model. But I would just leave it out in my brain, like a algorithm is fixed, and an AI is something that's more dynamic, I guess I would call it in nature.
Yeah, that makes sense. So in the space of retail,
yeah,
can you name a few AI players? Again, we're not sponsors. For the listeners, this is not pay to play. Are there some that are pulling this off right? AI providers in the space?
That's a good question. My intuition, so I can't, not in a position to rattle off specific company names. Okay. But I will say that my intuition would be that behind it all, there are probably some defense contractors that are also working with retailers to do things that would probably blow our minds. I'm going to reach out on a limb on that.
Yep.
That aren't the classic who we would think it would be. But again, even there too, the insights derived are probably more so for the purposes of thinking about how do we mitigate? Well, how do we reduce it versus eliminate it? Maybe even as an opportunity to push back on insurance companies and their premiums and say, hey, we have a different thought on what our losses could look like in many respects. Because it's always going to land on, so what do we do with it? What do we do with it? There's been AI companies, and I'm sure you've heard of them, that have been in different spaces and places within retail that look to help drive staff to do things more effective on the floor.
Oh yeah.
Right. And they are able to derive these incredible prescriptions on what you should do. It's funny how so many retailers that I hear about these technologies go, that's great, but I don't have the labor hours to do it. Who's going to do it? Who's going to do it? And so I think it still plays out in the same vein when it comes to some of these more existential things of sorts, I guess. If it depends on if you're talking about active shooter existential, if it's inventory loss, I'm sorry. But I think it still plays out there too, in respects to, so what do I do? It's the person, it's the people involved, it's the humans that are involved. And also these models, a lot of these models are still, unfortunately, because of the nature of how they work, they derive data from our everyday, and sometimes our everyday might not be the prescription for making a go forward sound prediction. Now, kind of vaguely there.
You bring up a great point, and I saw this evolution at my last employ. When you introduce technology for all the right reasons to help, reduce manual tasks, mundane tasks, increase, hopefully, levels of execution. One thing that, for the audience, a refresh, I was, Walmart 1995 all the way to 2017, and vast differences, nowhere near the same company it was in 95 in a lot of good areas. But what I clearly could begin to see is that the resident expertise, to our point we're talking about so what, how do I fix it? Yeah. The ability something as simple as a store manager, Shawn Harris, an old school store manager, would know precisely how to affect every line on a P&L. They know what goes in that line because they're merchants. But
Right.
then we got so much technology, we didn't even worry about, the P&L. We did. All you had to know is, was it F5 or F3 was the button you pushed.
Yeah.
Red, green, yellow was, so you didn't worry about anything. Red was your priority, yellow was when you got time, and green, don't even worry about it.
Yeah.
But it began to supplant the resident expertise and depth of knowledge to know how to affect things when they went off the rail. And different generations of store leadership, you could tell. So if you go talk to a guy that's, been running that store for 35 years, dude, you ain't going to tell him anything he doesn't know how to fix.
Right.
And you talk to some of the newer generation guys and they're like, so what app is that on? And so I want to say that because, it's not just in retail is, the more we automate and the more we take off of our brains and more that's done for us. I don't know whether it's atrophy or if it's, well, that's probably the best word for it, is that when, in the military, you're a veteran and we got a lot of veterans that listen to us. Yeah. We know what to do when shit hits the fan.
Yeah.
It's not an app. It's not a decision matrix. We know when shit hits the fan or the balloon goes up, as we used to say in Europe.
Yeah.
We know exactly what we're supposed to do. My fear is that with the increasing introduction of technology and AI and decision making doing great things for us, is that a risk in true know-how?
Yeah. I think I'm hearing two things here. One probably has to deal with how associates in those levels are onboarded and trained and prepared for the task ahead of them. I think there's probably opportunities there. The second thing is, even though we talk about that retailer who in the past understood all of the levers, they're undoubtedly from there to here, the number of dials have changed in terms of now, because of data, because of technology, we now know that there are more levers that we can twist at another level to tweak things. And that the nature of that business was, for what it's worth, potentially simpler than the one that exists today because of the additional knobs. Now, to that, I say, there's probably a gap with respects to the store operators, the store managers' user experience with these applications and with managing the store. That what we found over the years with technology is that we are slowly but surely, we abstract away from the complex. We abstract away, making things simpler. We abstract away, and things become easier to use. I mean, all of what is happening on our mobile phones are an immense number of abstractions from some very complex things happening within this phone, right? Yeah. This thing is so simple to use, but it's a multiple layers of abstraction. What I'm getting at with user experience and for store operators is say, have we missed accounting for how are we abstracting for that user in the store such that it is still as easy as the person 20 years ago. It's still as easy for them as it was for the person 20 years ago to manage the complexity. Have we lost that? So now they have a ton more apps to integrate with, a ton more, the reports may not come on printed, green bar paper, but they still get a ton of information that they need to consider and look at. Have we not provided store staff, store operators with the right UX for the work that they have to do today? I wonder if there's an opportunity there.
I absolutely agree with you. And, I was always stunned that, because P&L reviews were a monthly thing. That was a conference call across the market or the region, and you had to answer. Why in the hell are you down? And such and such, whatever. You had to know that. And when the automation came in, that disappeared.
Hands off the wheel.
Yep.
Wasn't my responsibility.
It's like hell. As long as my scorecard on profit is green, screw it. Keep selling shit.
Yeah.
So if I'm in the arena of AI, and if I'm a vice president of asset protection for Kroger, and I'm not a technical guy, I mean, we're not Shawn Harris.
Sure.
So we're walking the exhibit hall, we're seeing all this AI. What, in your mind, to the layman would say these things have strong potential when you talk to somebody, and be leery of this because it's probably vaporware or it's too far down the road? Help kind of, I know that's a big ask, dude, but how do you simplify that so I don't get the feedback I did from the NRF Big Show from technical people that said, geez, Louise, my head was spinning when I walked out.
Yeah.
And if you're trying to sell shit as a supplier, that isn't the image, that isn't what you want to project. It's specificity attached to a specific business problem. So what should I as a VP be looking for?
Yeah. So fact is that a lot of what we're seeing, especially at NRF, had seen in the marketplace were bolt-on capabilities, right? They were taking more likely than not ChatGPT and basically taking it and making it such that you could converse with the data in their platform through a prompt.
Okay.
Right. And then from that, they called it AI, but inherent to their application is not AI. They just bolted on a conversational capability that gave them the opportunity to use, to jump into the hype.
Okay.
Right. I think what a loss prevention leader would want to look for, just fundamentally, is they have their known, they have things that are going to be top of the list from a must solve perspective.
Yep.
And looking for solutions that solve that. If it has AI in it, great. If it doesn't and it solves your problem, then then you're good. I wouldn't per se believe that all is well because AI has been mentioned. AI to me, and you've heard people call it electricity. It is going to be something that's going to be everywhere. So like don't allow that solely to determine the value of the solution. It is going to be a function of, does this solve my problem?
Okay.
And going with and I know it's a basic statement. Like, when we talk about what to look for, what not, if the thing solves your problem and they're claiming AI, it solves your problem. Who cares how they're solving your problem, and it's a great price and it aligns to your other criteria. Great. And I think this goes with, I know that was a simple statement around look for things that solve your problem, and don't worry about if it says AI or not. And if it does and it does it, great. And if it doesn't and it does solve your problem, great. But this is a little bit of the world that we're in. And I've experienced this too with talking to people, is that they are immediate today because of the markets are demanding that executives have a quote unquote AI story, that there has been enough written by advisories that say AI is going to be this multi-trillion-dollar opportunity if you take advantage of it. That, undoubtedly there's need, but there's also FOMO with respects to all of the GPUs getting bought through NVIDIA, right? I need to have them. Like I know there are companies who've built these monster clusters and are trying to figure out what to do with them, right? And that, you know, yeah, this world we're living in right now is, unfortunately, has this little bit of what's the killer app, and honestly, it should be what's the killer problem, and then asking yourself, is the right way to solve it with AI? And when you think about AI and what it can do, AI is and there's two different branches you can look at, I guess, in some respects. On one end, it is the world's greatest prediction machine, right? It can predict, in the case of the chat GPTs of the world and what have you, it can predict the next word. And when you train an LLM to be a chatbot, you can give it questions and it can predict the next word based on questions. Or it could be something that discovers, right? And I talked about this earlier with respect to the clustering of data. It can discover patterns in data, and you can then use that to actually create models that predict circumstances of the same. If you can just think through the lens of, man, every day that when you and I wake up, there are this constant number of predictions that are happening, that have led up to this point. There are those things that we consciously predict and think about. Should I jump over this gap or should I turn around? And there are things that we subconsciously do, like the words coming out of my mouth are just coming out of my mouth based on my training data.
Yep.
Right. And thinking about, where are the opportunities where I'll say the first one I think people should be focused on. One is where a better prediction would help us realize value faster.
Agreed.
Right?
Yep.
Which is not the thing that I think most people focus on first, but that's where I think, like, if I knew something with higher accuracy, there was something that I knew and there's an abstraction that needs to happen here where I need to make a prediction and it would help me to realize value faster, well, go after that. The second thing, which most people are doing, is where can we use this prediction to become more efficient, right? Where can we make it faster, take costs out of the business? That's where a lot of it is at. But those would be the abstractions that I think through, is like, as I'm looking at my environment, is fundamentally predictions are everywhere. They're happening all the time. Some of them are freeform, like they're just made based on all within laws that they're being made. And then there are some that are being made with guidelines and frameworks and standards, like accounting. There's predictions in there too, right? But I guess that's how I would think about it. I know that's still an abstraction of a thought.
Well, in the now 30 years in retail, and if I were to ask any VP, what are your top three problems? Shrink typically was number one. And second to that, certainly in the top three, but second to that was safety. And then, third would be, workplace violence or, something else. Because, you've been in loss prevention in retail. It's largely a negative business. Good things, are not what you get paid to mitigate.
Yeah.
But since COVID, number one, almost unanimously, is safety.
Safety.
Meaning threat of active shooter.
Slip and
the
falls,
violence
maybe,
levels,
the
levels of violence.
Yep.
Yeah, the levels of violence when they attempt to, interrupt a shoplifting, and the guy pulls out a butcher knife or a machete or an AK. And that, to say it struck me it really isn't the right word, but it kind of reshuffles the deck to say that for the first time in almost 2 generations, our number one concern is the safety of our people in the building and the customers. And so, to your exact point, the predictability of being able, and it's hard to predict. I get it. In layman's terms, I'm like, how in the hell do you predict some squirrel brain in a cabin in the mountains? All of a sudden, something goes thump in the night, and his brain shifts, and he grabs a couple guns and some hand grenades and goes to Walmart.
Yeah, yeah.
That's really hard to predict. And we have so we have about 5 minutes, and one last question. I want to quote a phrase for you, and I want your opinion.
Yep.
You and I are in a meeting. I'm a retailer. You are a solution provider. You walk through your dog and pony show, 587 slides, golf game, everything. And my tech guy's in the room because I'm the VP of asset protection, but the tech guys in the room say, hey, nice solution, but we can do that internally. What's your thought?
So
in the AI space.
Right. So, certainly it depends on the nature of the platform. But one thing is for sure, unless it's they were hired to do that thing.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much to be said about focus and whether or not only their focus will be solely on it, but also will the organization be aligned to support them in driving what they're trying to accomplish. And so as an outside service provider, you are in a position where you have that focus and your organization is built to provide the thing that you're delivering. You've hired people explicitly from a SME perspective. So again, there's a lot of depends there.
Sure.
But I'm always a big believer in certainly going with competency and focus will go a long way.
Yeah.
Certainly resource. But let me say this: if the capability is something that could end up being IP, like that it becomes secret sauce or gives an advantage to the organization, there might be some consideration for that organization to lean in from a resource perspective and give those people who can build it the focus and the means and the space and time to build it if it's going to be valuable for the organization. But that's a tough one for me because again, there's a lot of dependencies. That you had to go into making that prediction.
Yep. Well, let me say this for our listeners. I promise you, I did not pay Shawn to answer that question that way. But those that know me understand that is a challenge. So, in the big scheme of things in retail, you have operations, you have all the initiatives they're doing, they're competing priorities on the deck. And when you hear that phrase, and when I used to hear that phrase from my own internal people, that meant end of conversation. And you're probably not going to see a suitable solution to exactly what you said, Shawn. I'm not going to get 100% focused. Right. If I call somebody and say, hey, something went thump in the night, they're like, well, yeah, we can get you into Q4 of 2038.
Right.
They
moved on to another project. Yeah.
That's right. I mean, it's not going to be 100% focused. So you might get an Excel spreadsheet with an ink pen instead of a crayon, but any other iterative improvement after that is unlikely. I too, buddy, have always been a huge fan of third-party providers. Yeah. The right third-party provider for the right solution. And as you correctly said, there are a lot of dependencies. But what you also said, dude, that is also a key concern is the appeal of the retailer, the appeal of that technology to do other things. Yeah. And then are we interested in truly contracting with this provider? Are we more interested in what they do and making it part of what we do at retail?
Right.
So, that's, over the years, in asset protection, with EAS, lock and show cases, all that crap's been out there since mid last century. There was no threat to anybody wanting to copy anything. It was who was cheapest and who could handle the volume. But then when you get in the software business, it's completely different. And as I've learned, and I'll just say it, the rules of integrity I have learned in technology are typically not the same as they are in the rest of the business.
Yeah.
The ethics rules are just not. So thank you for, that's awesome. And trust me, audience, we did not script this. And Shawn's been around a lot of, you said Zebra, you've got your own startup. Infantry veteran. Are you, if you don't mind me asking, if you don't want to answer, that's fine. Your association with Harvard and the Ivy Leagues, are you a grad of any of those guys? Or
I'm actually not, but I spent so much time there. I almost can kind of give myself a self-supported honorary, but no.
Yep, honorary degree.
I'm
okay.
not. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, guys, we'll wrap it up there. Again, Shawn is, we crossed paths when I did some work with Zebra Technologies when Shawn was there. And I won't go into specifics, but it was always engaging talking to you, dude, just watching, a room full of executives, you being one of, I don't know how many were there, 15.
Yeah.
And I'm a big body language guy. I mean, I'm asset protection guy. And the body language was, I could read you and see that if, okay, we're done with this, let's, move on.
Yeah.
Or if something caught your attention. And the reason we're still friends, what was that, 10, I don't know how many years ago.
Yeah,
I
think about 10 years ago, yeah.
You think differently. And I think in the asset protection risk mitigation industry, that is still a point, remain a focus point of thinking differently and get us past what we are still seeing in retail today. Right. Same thing we saw in 1970. So I appreciate your insight, Shawn, in helping us and the listeners kind of, as my first sergeant always said, pick the fly shit out of the pepper, figure out in this maze of AI, what are the layers under that? And not only that, how do I more intelligently go to an exhibit show and
look for what's
do that.
Real. Yeah.
So you're on LinkedIn for the audience. Your contact info's there.
Yep. I am /Shawn Harris, ShawnHarris. I'm the one who's been in internet long enough to own ShawnHarris.com.
Oh, cool.
So I'm Shawn at ShawnHarris.com. I'm also in. Check it out. I'm Shawn at coworked, COWORKED.ai as well, and we're doing some incredible things there as well.
Good. All right, buddy. Well, thank you very much. And audience participants, please reach out to Shawn. He has been my go-to for a long time now. And just get over yourself if you have to ask what you think's a stupid question, because Shawn doesn't make you feel stupid answering it. So I appreciate it, buddy. And I'll see you in a few days at Harvard. Thanks, buddy.
See you there.
See ya.
Okay, bye.
Have a good day.